Picture the world in the 9th century. If you've watched enough movies, you probably have a specific image in your head. The Dark Ages. You picture Europe in the mud, where science was viewed with suspicion. Medicine was little more than superstition, and the great knowledge of the Greeks and Romans seemed lost to time. But what if I told you that while one part of the world was sleeping, another was inventing the future? Thousands of miles away from the mud of London or Paris, there was a city that looked like science fiction compared to its contemporaries. In this city, the streets were paved. There were paper mills churning out books by the thousands. If you got sick, you didn't just pray. You went to a hospital, a real hospital, where the doctors had to pass board exams to practice and where healthcare was free for everyone, rich or poor. This was Baghdad, the city of peace. And at its center stood a legendary institution that became the engine room of the Silk Road, the House of Wisdom. Inside its walls, a group of scholars, men of every religion and background, were doing things that looked like magic. They were distilling chemicals to create new compounds. They were performing eye surgeries. They were building handheld computers to map the stars. They are the reason you have a tabby cat, the reason you use alcohol in medicine, and the reason we understand how vision works. This is the forgotten story of the mad scientists of the Silk Road and how they saved human knowledge from extinction. To understand the science, you have to understand the laboratory where it happened. In the year 762, the Abbasid Caliphate decided to move their capital. They didn't just want a city, they wanted a symbol of the universe. They chose a site near the Tigris River and built Medinat al-Salam, the city of peace. It wasn't built like the organic, sprawling cities of Europe. It was a perfect circle surrounded by mighty walls. Think of it as a giant wheel. It had 4 massive gates, each opening toward a different corner of the world. The Basra gate opened to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. The Kufa gate pointed to Medina and Mecca. The Damascus gate looked toward the Mediterranean, and the Khorasan gate opened the road to Persia, Central Asia, and the Silk Road. This location wasn't an accident, it was a business plan. Baghdad became the ultimate intersection. Traders arrived from East Africa, India, Russia, and even China. They brought spices, ivory, and furs, but they also brought something more valuable: ideas. The city became a manufacturing powerhouse. The artisans here were so skilled that China, the inventor of silk, actually sent their raw silk to Baghdad to be processed into high-end textiles. In fact, the city produced a specific type of watered silk cloth in the Al-Atabiya district called Atabi cloth. It was striped and wavy. When this cloth finally reached England centuries later, they called it tabby. So if you have a striped tabby cat at home, its name comes from a textile district in 9th century Baghdad. But while the merchants traded silk, the caliphs were trading in a different currency: knowledge. Under the reign of Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mamun, Baghdad grew into a metropolis of 1 million people. These rulers were obsessed with collecting books. They started a movement that history calls the translation movement. The goal was audacious: to gather all the knowledge in the world and translate it into Arabic. The caliphs sent agents to the Byzantine Empire to buy up ancient Greek scientific manuscripts. They welcomed Jewish, Christian, and Zoroastrian scholars into the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, to work side by side with Muslims. Legend has it that the caliph paid scholars the weight of each translated book in gold dust. Whether that's true or not, the output was staggering. They translated Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and Ptolemy. This explosion of books was fueled by a secret technology that had just arrived from the Silk Road: paper. The Arabs learned paper-making techniques from Chinese prisoners of war, and soon Baghdad had paper mills. This meant knowledge wasn't stuck on expensive parchment anymore. It could be copied, shared, and exported. Out of this intellectual pressure came the geniuses. First, let's talk about the father of chemistry, Jabir Al Hayyan. Before Jabir, alchemy was mostly mystical nonsense. People trying to turn lead into gold with magic spells. Jabir changed the game. He introduced the scientific method to the process. He invented the alembic. If you've ever seen a chemistry lab or even a whiskey distillery, you've seen the descendants of his invention. He perfected the process of distillation, allowing for the creation of acids and alcohol. He moved humanity from magic potions to chemical reactions. Then there was medicine. In Europe at this time, if you had a toothache, the village barber might just pull it out. In Baghdad, they had the world's first major hospital system, established under Harun al-Rashid. The star of this system was al-Razi. He was a polymath who wrote over 200 books. But his real contribution was his humanity. He championed the radical idea that a patient's mental state affected their physical health. He is known today as the father of pediatrics because he was the first to treat children as a distinct group, not just miniature adults. He wrote the definitive book differentiating smallpox from measles, a distinction that saved countless lives. And perhaps most incredibly for the time, he instituted a policy that healthcare was a right. Citizens received free care, and Baghdad's physicians were required to pass exams to ensure they knew what they were doing. But they weren't just looking down at microscopes, they were looking up at the stars. The scholars of Baghdad built the first observatories in the Islamic world. They invited Indian astronomers to the city to teach them about Hindu mathematics and planetary tables. This collaboration refined a device called the Astrolabe. Think of the Astrolabe as the smartphone of the Middle Ages. It was an analog computer. Muslim astronomers discovered 1,000 uses for it. You could use it to tell time, to survey land, to calculate the height of a mountain, and to navigate across the ocean. Crucially, they developed it to work anywhere on the planet, not just at a specific latitude. This technology would eventually travel back up the Silk Road and into Europe, helping explorers like Columbus navigate centuries later. Scholars like Al Hayyan revolutionized the field of optics, introducing the concept that scientific hypotheses must be proven by evidence, the very foundation of modern science. Another scholar, Al-Tusi, was writing about the nature of the Milky Way galaxy hundreds of years before telescopes existed. So, where did this city of the future go? In 1258, the Silk Road brought something other than trade to Baghdad's gates. The Mongol army arrived. The siege lasted only 10 days, but the destruction was absolute. The Mongols sacked the city. They burned the palaces and the mosques. But the greatest tragedy was the destruction of the House of Wisdom. The accounts from the time are heartbreaking. Survivors said that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that the water ran black from the ink. They also said the river ran red with the blood of the scholars. The Islamic Golden Age in Baghdad was effectively over, but while the buildings burned, the ideas survived. Copies of these books had already traveled along the trade routes. They ended up in places like the School of Translators in Toledo, Spain. There, scholars translated the Arabic texts, which were themselves translations of the Greek texts, into Latin. When the thinkers of the European Renaissance rediscovered science, they were often reading it through the lens of Baghdad. The words we use today prove it. Alchemy, algorithm, algebra, alcohol. These are all words rooted in this era. The light of civilization didn't go out in the Dark Ages. It just moved east. And thanks to the mad scientists of the Silk Road, it was kept burning until the world was ready to see it again.